hear me okay? Okay. My name is Joey Ram. I am a biocognitive neuroscientist from University of Illinois. My area of study is on the neurobiological underpinnings of post-traumatic stress disorder and mild traumatic brain injury. When I started in college to study neuroscience, I wanted to utilize the work in stem cell therapy to try and develop some treatments for multiple mild traumatic brain injuries so that we could minimize the potential of psychiatric conditions later on in life. It took me about 9 years to get my degree, and 8 of those years I spent in laboratories with service dogs. Samson is my second service dog. Theo is the one I started college with, and he was retired about 3 years ago, and Samson took his place. So when I first started, though, there were no service dogs in laboratories at all. So there were a lot of hurdles to overcome. I had to work with safety people, compliance people. It took over a year to be granted access to the first chemistry laboratory at the University of Illinois with a service dog. In their 150-year history, they had never had a service dog or allowed a service dog in any laboratory for core coursework or research. So you can imagine the hurdles and the barriers. I had to work with safety people, compliance people, ADA compliance people, faculty members, administrators. It took a great, huge amount of effort and concentration and a lot of maneuvering to work. And I also worked with the American Chemical Society to develop safety protocols and change some policies at the university. It was difficult. So my service dog Theo was the very first to enter a general chemistry lab, general chemistry 1, 2, and organic chemistry. And then Samson here was the first to enter a biology lab or genetics lab. And as far as we know, he is the first service dog to enter a research laboratory, neuroscience research laboratory in the nation. So I'm here not to talk to you about molecular and cellular biology and neuroscience, but to talk to you about service dogs in science. So why is this topic really important? The National Science Federation has placed a really high priority on diversity in the STEM workforce in the United States. About 34.9% of the national workforce, ages 18 to 64, are disabled. Yet, only 2% of the national workforce are STEM professionals with disabilities. Only 6% of that 2% are in science or biology. 4% of college students with disabilities study in chemistry, physics, or biology labs. Students with disabilities have stated to me that they feel unsupported by faculty members and administration. So this population remains really unrepresented, and they do experience outright exclusion. So a lot of STEM education literature is really focusing on published works and science manuals on diversity, yet there's a disconnect between university initiatives on inclusion. So what we need to do is we need to start outlining protocols and guidelines for people with disabilities in general. But this is an even larger hurdle for service dog handlers. Student service dog handlers are being denied access to core laboratory courses nationwide. I get emails constantly, all the time, asking how they can help a student or how a student can enter a laboratory. These core laboratory courses prepare students for biomedical careers and in academics. Not only that, a lot of these core general chemistry courses are required for a lot of majors that are not even going into science, biomedical, or academics. This comes even more complicated when you're entering the field with a service dog. Science fields are highly competitive, and they require an intense amount of time and focus and are a very high anxiety environment. I had a faculty member say to me about a month ago, they said, why would I bring a student in to a research lab when it requires so much extra time and attention from me, when I have hundreds of other normal applicants waiting for this position. So most people entering science fields with disabilities, service dog handlers included, if they're going through the general chemistry, organic chemistry, biology, and genetics, they're probably going to have to get some sort of research credit at some point, 2 semesters or 3 semesters. So with that, they have to be accepted into research laboratories. Now, when a student walks in, let's say with a non-visible disability, and they are applying for a lab position to the same faculty member, they don't have to disclose anything. And if they're hired based on their merit, then they bring in a letter of accommodations from their disability office. Someone walks in with a service dog, this is the same faculty member said, I don't have time, I don't have the energy. They walk in with a service animal and they immediately say, this is going to take too much attention, and I have hundreds of other applicants. So there's been a steady increase in the use of service dogs nationwide. They're being utilized for not only guide and hearing, but also for diabetic alert, seizure alert, all kinds of medical conditions, including psychiatric conditions. Assistance Dogs International, or the ADI, is a national organization that accredits service dog training nationwide, and they're the ones that developed the public access test. They did a survey back in 2017, and they found that the demand for service dogs had risen 44% between 2013 and 2017. In the same survey, they found that there were 19,144 known ADI accredited service dog handlers in the year 2017. We know that's only a fraction, though, because most organizations are not accredited by the ADI. They don't have to be. And it is a very long, intensive 6-month process, 400 pages of documents, all kinds of reviews and all kinds of regulations that they have to follow. So there are a lot of training organizations that are not accredited by the ADI. Also, you can train your own service dog currently under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It does not have to be trained by an organization. So we know this is only a fraction. The presence of service dogs in our communities and on our campuses is going to continue to increase. In the year 2017, University of Illinois showed in their fiscal year report, they showed a 58% rise in students coming in with disabilities that were enrolling for services. A good portion of these people with disabilities had non-visible disabilities. And there was a portion of them who were also have service animals. So with this increase, accessibility for science or service dog handlers in science is going to have to be evaluated. Universities are going to be faced with this more often. A lot of times when students come in with a service dog and they enroll in services or whatever, they're finding that they're being told by academic advisors not to pursue science because of the barriers and the obstacles that they have to overcome. Also, they're sometimes just choosing to forego it because of the rigorous coursework, and then on top of that, they have to advocate for themselves. A lot of times, they'll get started and they'll get into chemistry labs or whatever, and they'll find it too difficult and they'll drop out, not just out of class, but out of college completely. One of the most heartbreaking messages I got about a year ago was from a mother whose daughter was in a college course, pre-vet med, was 2 semesters away from graduating, and they were completely banned from a class that was important for their graduation. They had to take this class for graduation. They were banned completely because of their service animal, and they were told to leave their service animal at home. This girl tried to go to class. This was a diabetic alert dog. She ended up in the hospital because she didn't have her dog to alert her in a highly stressful environment. Nothing changed when this happened. That girl ended up quitting school completely, dropping out of college. She had a 3.96 GPA. She has not returned because she can't return without her service animal. So these types of stories I hear all the time. This is an issue that we need to start addressing. We need to start addressing proactively. Just real quick, I'm finding that there's a lot of confusion surrounding the roles filled by assistance dogs. So what is a service dog? They are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, by law. A service dog is one that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for a person with a disability. They are the only assistance dogs granted public access by law. And they can accompany people into areas where the public is generally allowed. There are only two questions that can be asked if it is not readily apparent that the dog is a service animal. Is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And two, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? You cannot ask for certification, documentation. You can't ask about the person's disability, their medical history, any personal information, and you can't ask that dog to perform the tasks in front of you. So a therapy and a facility dog, they are not protected by law under the ADA. So they are generally certified every 2 years. That seems counterintuitive. But because of the ADA, service animals are protected. Therapy and facility dogs are generally trained to provide some comfort, and they go into like nursing homes, hospitals, that kind of thing. They're encouraged to interact with people. They are used in courtrooms, but they do have to be certified. They do not have public access unless they have prior approval from the area that they're going to attend. Now, emotional support animals. We've seen a lot in the news, in social media and everything else about emotional support animals. And there's a lot of conflict and there's a lot of confusion because they're being allowed into airplanes, which is a public space. And honestly, that's one of the most highly stressful environments for a service animal, is on an airplane. They're also being given special considerations for housing. So some people actually believe that an emotional support animal has the same rights as a service animal, which they do not. So an emotional support animal can be anything. Can be any animal at all. Can be an iguana or a dog or a cat, or it can be a peacock. It can be, had to throw that in there. It can be an elephant. It can be anything that provides emotional comfort. They have no specialized training. Right now, a person can get a doctor's note, and I am very supportive of emotional support animals in the role that they are to be used for. But a person can get a letter from their doctor, can go to the SPCA and pick out the cutest dog that they want. They can buy a vest online, and they can go on a plane all within 3 days without even knowing anything about this dog, what kind of stress they've been under, what kind of environment they come from, and what they're capable of doing. Service animals go through extensive training. And for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to talk primarily about accredited service dog training organizations. So, example, Samson went through 2 years of training. He went through 18 months of training prior to being placed with me, and then we spent an additional 9 months training for access to laboratories, because he wears goggles, and he wears boots, and he wears a lab coat, which we'll get to. It's coming up. Pictures are coming. But the problem with emotional support animals, and I'm going to touch on this really quick and then I'm going to move on, is that I have people tell me all the time, well, I take my dog to parties, we go to fireworks, it sits, it obeys, it does all this, it plays with the neighborhood kids, it plays with the other dogs' friends, it's going to be fine. But what happens if you put this animal into an environment where it's unfamiliar and it gets frightened? It's going to do what animals do, and it's either going to flee or it's going to fight. If it flees, it's going to run away or get hit by a car. If it fights, it could possibly bite or attack a legitimate service dog, which could be fatal, could permanently disable a working service dog, which is the independent lifeline for a person with a disability, or they could potentially bite a human or a child, and then that person who's relying on this dog for emotional well-being now has to be euthanized. This is something we need to start really addressing as well. So some of the barriers for service dogs in science. Federal and state laws don't provide any clear guidelines. Americans with Disability Act protects people in public areas. Was developed in 1980. They could not have possibly known what a service animal would be, or service dog would be used for in the year 2018. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act protect students in education. They do protect the rights of people with service dogs to enter public areas, but they don't identify any specific training or require any registration. So one of the most extensive learning experiences a student can have who's going into biomedics or academics or into a science career is the hands-on experience they get in core course laboratories and potentially research laboratories. Yet university service dog policies with guidelines with respect to laboratory components either don't exist, they're relatively ambiguous, or they're unnecessarily complex. Some universities have no service dog policy. Word of mouth. Those that do have service dog policies generally don't outline core coursework for labs or research. And some of the universities that do prohibit service dogs from entering laboratories mention exceptions and case-by-case determination. And we want to keep that case-by-case determination, but unfortunately there's no guidelines. This ambiguous policy then leaves a lot to the subjective nature of each faculty member and each university. This subjectivity leads to personal bias sometimes. This means that the student has to advocate for themselves against the tenured hierarchy, the administration, and the bureaucracy of a university with very powerful legal teams to back them up. This is really daunting for, say, an 18 to 22 to 25-year-old student who maybe just came out of high school. And now they're faced with going up against an entire university system who's telling them, no, you can't use your medical equipment. This sets also the university up for legal ramifications. So as a professional, an expert in the field, I'm frequently asked to consult with universities or with students and with attorneys who are filing OCR complaints, Office of Civil Rights complaints. There are a lot of them out there. If any of you follow listservs, there's a ton of them out there right now. And I don't agree with all of them, but some of them I read are very valid. And the thing that is frustrating is there are easy solutions. There are very simple solutions, which we will get to. So we need to establish an informed protocol, guidelines, or something that clearly outlines what is expected for these case-by-case determinations. A lot of times college administrators just don't understand what a service dog is, what the training is. I've had people say to me, my dog barks. Won't your dog bark? Won't it run around like crazy? I think not. They ask me if he has fleas. You know, all of these types of questions come up because people don't understand the depth of training involved. Also, there are a lot of different cultures involved on college campuses and in the workforce, and dogs are different in different cultures. So there's a lot of misunderstanding. So also the absence of safety guidelines for accommodating a student with a service dog in science. This absence of informed guidelines leads then to individual interpretation. A lot of faculty members just choose to err on the side of caution. They're too busy, they don't want to adjust, they don't want to change, they don't want to have to look at the possibilities. They're busy, doing grants and doing their own research and taking care of students and all of these things. They're valid concerns. Now, I have been up against some people whose opinions are disturbing, but they are in power positions over these students with service animals. And they are preventing students from engaging in these activities that are very imperative for their success. A lot of times they just go to personal opinion. They don't like dogs. So therefore, they're not going to allow them in their laboratories. So all this leads to this prohibition of service dog handlers from accessing the laboratory experiences. Now, I'm going to briefly go through just some of the lab information. I'm going to talk about chemical and biological laboratories. Not every laboratory is a safe environment for a service dog. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services outlines a level of personal protective equipment, or PPE, for a student. But this level of personal protective equipment is across the board, from the sanitation worker all the way up to the Department of Defense. It is labeled A, B, C, and D, with D being the most minimal risk. Usually no protection is required. Most, or like general and organic chemistries, are level C, laboratory. And they do require chemical-resistant gloves, eye protection shoes, and clothing. Center for Disease Control, CDC, outlines biosecurity levels. They outline at BSL 1, 2, 3, and 4, with BSL 1 being the lowest level. This is the level of most core biology courses. Same PPE applies for chemical-resistant clothing, lab coat, goggles, etc. There's no known risk of disease. At this point, a lot of open lab benches and tables. Service dog handler can safely be accommodated in both a chemistry lab course and a BSL 1 and a BSL 2 lab. BSL 2 lab uses some chemicals and microbes that could be hazardous. All the BSL 1 personal protective equipment applies, but they also use fume hoods for ventilation. They use storage cabinets and autoclaves for decontamination. This would require individual risk assessment. What I'm proposing, what I'm working on now, is designing a risk assessment checklist for faculty members to go through their laboratories and check off what the hazards might be. And then that information will be analyzed, and it will be decided at that point what the risk is for a service dog within a laboratory, what type of protection they would need, and what type of areas that they might need to be in. So solutions. Samson works in a research laboratory, BSL 2 lab. We have a lot of hazardous materials in there, including carcinogens. Every single day he goes to work in goggles, boots, and a lab coat. He lays on a mat that has a rubber backing, so he's not exposed to any chemicals that are on the ground. So we have to establish informed university-wide service dog policy for science labs. That's hard to do because each university doesn't have to follow what another university does. But I recently just talked to the Big 10 universities, and I asked them if they could come together and come up with a university-wide policy. And they agreed. A committee has been formed, and we are starting to work on that at the beginning of next year. We need to develop these informed guidelines so case-by-case determinations are made more objectively, not subjectively. You can require the service dog to wear the same personal protective equipment as a student. So if a student doesn't have to wear goggles that day, a dog does not have to wear goggles. But don't mistake boots for gloves. Boots are shoes. So when the dog walks into a laboratory, they are exposed to broken glass, possibly on the ground, something that was spilled and not cleaned up properly. This is why a service dog should also never lay directly on the floor without protection, because they can get this on their fur. Some more solutions. Discuss positioning of the service dog with the handler. What are they comfortable with? You can identify a bench where the service dog can rest without any chemicals above them. In this picture here, Theo is behind me. There are no chemicals. There's no one working there. Samson above, there are no chemicals above him. He's working directly behind me. You can place them generally at the opposite side of, say, a fume hood if possible, because that minimizes the risk of any kind of vapors that might migrate to the ground level. And always within direct line of sight of their handler. You can request, if the service dog handler is comfortable with it, to have a laboratory partner or someone to volunteer. This works really great in course labs because everyone has a lab partner. you can ask for a partner who might be willing to walk across the lab and retrieve reagents or equipment or something. Also, you can also ask the safety people who set up for the day to set reagents or balances or something that might be across the lab closer to your workbench. We can also provide a checklist of suggested skills necessary for accessing a lab. By outlining this suggested or required training, you can put this together and provide this to a student, say, who's coming in as a freshman, and they're designing their four-year academic plan. And they're trying to decide, whether they can move forward with the service animal. You provide this checklist and tell them, this is how you keep your dog safe. This is what your dog will have to know and be able to do to access these laboratories safely. This way, the student can make an informed decision whether they want to move forward or whether they can effectively train their dog to follow this checklist. It's unreasonable to expect any handler to put goggles on a dog 2 days prior to a class and ask that dog to work effectively. We have to always remember that we're accommodating the student. We're not accommodating the dog. And the dog is there doing a medically necessary job, and it cannot be distracted by additional goggles or boots or something that they are not used to. So by providing this checklist, the student can work with their trainers or work with their dog for whatever amount of time prior to classes. And they know if their dog will be able to maintain these skills. To wear the personal protective equipment, to downstay on command for up to 4 hours, to stay on a mat in a specific area without being tied, to not retrieve something from the ground. That's very important without command. A lot of service dogs are immediately trained to pick up something off the ground. To enter safety shower and to find an exit. And one question I'm asked continuously is, what if there's an explosion? What if there's a fire? What if there's a fire alarm? As an example, I was leaving a doctor's office not too long ago, and the fire alarm randomly went off. Everyone's filing out, and they're holding their ears because this screeching sound. And Samson is directly on my left, guiding me to an exit, through people, stood outside blocking from everyone else while fire trucks went by, people in uniforms were running by, full turnout gear. He didn't flinch because he was trained for that type of environment. The BSL-3 and BSL-4, right now a service animal cannot effectively work safely or be accommodated. I'm not saying it's not possible in the future. BSL-3 laboratories usually have medical surveillance, sometimes require immunizations, have some airborne type diseases. So we are not prepared right now to accommodate service animals in a BSL-3 or a BSL-4 lab. BSL-4 labs are very rare. There's only, I think, about 15, in the nation right now, and they require the positive pressure suit, etc. I'm not saying that a service animal sometime down the road may not be able to work effectively in full turnout gear with air and the whole thing. I think it's unlikely, and I think it's going to be a great deal of time, if ever. So some more solutions. Provide a service dog team provide students and faculty members facilities like football stadiums and things like that with training videos. I originally proposed that we fold in certification, or we do some certifications for people in research or science labs or faculty members, but we do enough certifications now as it is. So nobody wants to do more certifications. So in talking with faculty members, they suggested that we fold this information into already existing certifications, which is a possibility. Appropriate service dog interaction. A lot of people don't even know what that is, and this would be great for campus-wide. Just looking, people don't realize you should just address the handler directly. Make eye contact only with the handler, not the dog. Don't ask anything about the dog. Don't address the dog. Don't ask to pet the dog. Don't offer the dog treats. I've had so many people talking to me while talking to Sam, having a conversation with me while staring at Sam. I get he's cute and he's beautiful, And he loves people, which makes it hard because once you make eye contact with him, he's going to make eye contact with you. And then he's not paying attention to what I'm doing. He's trying to figure out what you're trying to say to him. Are you going to use the magic BALL words or something along that lines? Another huge problem we're facing, though, is currently service dogs are prohibited from animal facilities around the entire country. So a lot of the specific lab classes, just the core classes, require rodent work or animal work. And this presents a really specific hurdle for service dog handlers because of the prey-predator paradigm. A canine is a predator of a mouse or a rodent. And a lot of research relies on mice and rats. I put a lot of words up here because there's a lot of words in these policies, but there are key words. I mean, there's stacks of policies that I've read. But the USDA recommends a separation of species. It may be necessary. Institute of Animal Care and Use Committee, which is the committee that oversees all animal research throughout all academic universities nationwide, recommend the separation for interspecies disease or humane handling. But yet the NIH, was one of the largest grantors of research funding, say that there are exceptions. But none of these laws specifically address a service animal in the lab. So I went to get into a behavioral neuroscience lab and was absolutely refused. Brought in my access specialist, and the faculty member proceeded to get extremely irate, banging their hands on the desk, yelling and screaming at us, saying that I would never have a career in behavioral neuroscience because I had a service dog. To the point where when we left, my access specialist was shaking. So I wanted to address this, and I wanted to find out, because they were saying that having Samson laying in a corner would fundamentally alter the experiments that were being conducted, which were just, basic like water maze, anxiety type behavior. So I went out and I got a $50,000 research grant. I found a faculty member who would allow me to develop my protocol and run this research in his lab. And I wanted to determine the impact a service dog would have on rodent behavior and physiology. It was a 2-year study. The rationale would then provide the empirical data needed to make an informed decision. I know what I think would happen. I know what a lot of people would think would happen. But we needed the data. We needed empirical data to make these informed decisions. So we were going to test the rodent ultrasonic vocalization, which a lot of rodents do. We can't hear it, but when a predator comes in, they warn the colony by making this sound, and we have a machine that can record that. We wanted to test anxiety-like behavior and see if there were any alterations, because that could fundamentally alter the research. We also were going to test the blood corticosteroid levels, which is a way to test stress hormones. And if just having the canine present elevated this corticosteroid levels from baseline, then we would know. Also, we had a lot of precautions in place. We saw 3 veterinarians consulted with interspecies disease. There were no concerns. We were going to do this research on the 2nd floor, and the animal facility was in the basement, so that we didn't interfere with any ongoing research until we had the data. And all handling of the animals by myself was going to be recorded, time-stamped, and archived, so there was no question about conformational bias or conflict of interest. And there was going to be no direct contact between the service dog and the rodent. Even if Samson was tasking, he would be below bench level. This study was denied by the IACUC committee not once, but twice. The IACUC committee rarely denies any protocol. It's in the federal guidelines. It specifically states that it's not their job to deny, but to build protocols. And I want to note that the faculty member when I approached was not interested in allowing me to run this study in their laboratory, but they said, if you get the funding and you get a faculty member, you can run whatever research you want to run. This same person became the director of the IACUC committee just prior to us submitting our protocol. First, they denied it for lack of scientific merit. They simply said, there was 2 lines that said that I was the only student that was ever going to be seeking this type of accommodation. So, disability director met with the committee, my faculty member met with the committee, I did, the director of the Veterans Center, which we have on campus. All you students, or there are a lot of students that utilize service animals, they met with the committee. One of the veterinarians that we had originally met with was on the committee. So they denied us a second time, basically stating that the evidence that service dog handlers were seeking research was anecdotal, based on their experience. They raised biosecurity concerns, which we had already addressed. And remember, one of the veterinarians was on the committee staff. And they made some unrealistic recommendations about piping in animal odors, or me wearing a sweater and then putting it in the corner instead of having the dog in the room. I know. But the most disturbing part of this is the committee raised discrimination and bias concerns when, after the second denial of the protocol. Now, my faculty member has been doing research, animal rodent research, for 20 years and never been denied. So he called and asked them, what the problem was. And the committee member, while I was in the room, said that, and I'll quote, "Why would you want to run this research? Because if you find what we think you will find, you'll publish your work, and then we'll have to throw our doors wide open to every service dog that walks on this campus. We don't want that. Why would you want that?" So I knew in that moment that it wasn't about truth or about science. I had spent 18 months problem solving, working with the university, writing protocols, getting grants, going through all of the hoops that I was supposed to go through. It was never about the science. It was all about discrimination and bias. I filed an Office of Civil Rights complaint in October of 2017, citing discrimination and retaliation. As of December 2018, 55 people had been interviewed, university staff, federal IACUC committees, and also professionals in the field, researchers, to include rodent specialists at the Brain Bank in Boston. We still don't have a determination yet. It's been that long. But the reasoning is, OCR has stated that this is going to set a precedence, whichever way they find. It's going to set a precedence in moving forward for service dog handlers. Sadly, though, outside universities have reached out to us. We were in an article in the Scientist magazine in November, print issued November 2018, talking about the research we wanted to conduct. Universities have contacted us with student service dog handlers enrolling in these classes, wanting our data that we can't provide, unfortunately, that we were unable to collect. So anyone with contacts in universities, we're still looking for a place to run this research. So moving on, fake service dogs, that is a problem. It's a problem for everyone. It's a problem for businesses and colleges and universities. It's a problem for legitimate service dog handlers. This is something that is brought up to me more often when a barrier is brought up. How do I know your dog is a real service dog? There really is no current national or state mandated service dog registration or any kind of licensing, legal validation that a service dog has been trained or has met the standards for public access. The ADA refers to a service dog's training, but they don't outline any guidelines for training. You can purchase a service dog vest online or a certificate for $50. And fraudulent training organizations have now popped up all over the place and are charging $18,000 to $27,000 for a service dog. And people with legitimate disabilities in need don't understand, when they apply to a service dog organization that places a service dog free of charge, there's a 1 to 5 year wait at best. So they pay $27,000 thinking that they're getting a legitimate service dog, and they're getting a dog that is untrained. That a lot of these dogs don't even have basic obedience on them. So this is a huge, huge problem. Canines for Companions for Independent, CCI, is one of the largest training organizations accredited by ADI. And in a study in 2016, they stated that 77% of their graduates had an encounter with a fake service dog. They also said over a quarter had 10 or more encounters, and more than half of their service dogs had been bitten, snapped at, or distracted by one of these dogs. Samson has been attacked 3 times on the university campus. He doesn't understand. Fortunately, he did not become dog reactive, but a lot of service dogs end up having to be retired after this happens. So we are trying to develop some laws. I'm working in Illinois with legislators right now. 23 states do have a fake service dog law that fraudulent representation can be a $1,000 fine or even imprisonment in some places. I think it's California. In Illinois, what we're trying to establish is a voluntary registration where you would provide your documentation and you get a tag or a license or something that states that your service dog has been trained. But most importantly, what's happening is these fake service dogs are undermining the legitimate service dogs that are out there working. A lot of times it casts doubts on their training, and it casts doubts on the handler's need for assistance, especially for people with non-visible disabilities. But regardless of all these complications, per the ADA, a person, service dog handler, cannot be denied access based on discrimination or personal judgment. So a wide range of simple accommodations have emerged in recent years for people with disabilities, from larger beakers and test tubes to audio readouts on reagents and measurements, etc. We need to start exploring and implementing these for service dog handlers, to start developing accommodations and safety protocols. We need to standardize service dog policy to include service dogs in core courses. By developing these guidelines, we can use an informed source, someone who is not only familiar with service dogs, but also familiar with science. What's happening is a lot of closed-door committees on university campuses are making decisions based on their science knowledge, not on their knowledge of what a service dog is capable of. So we can also develop these checklists for safety, risk assessment checklists for faculty, so they don't have to take additional time. And it's more uniformed and can be these guidelines developed objectively. And you can require a service dog to wear the same personal protective equipment that a student wears. We also need to start focusing energy on removing personal and implicit bias as much as possible by providing the service dog etiquette training. Let people understand the depth of training that goes into a service dog and what they are capable of. Develop the material again with an informed source, possibly an accredited service dog training organization. And develop the safety guidelines for laboratory environments. We can continue working to develop access by providing the empirical data needed for rodent laboratories. If there's no effect or minimal effect or something we can acclimate for, then that would provide the basis for inclusion for service animals into the core course laboratories, and would provide the data for research PIs to take a look at and decide whether that would actually affect their ongoing experiment. If there's a striking effect, that would provide the data for exclusion for service dogs. We just don't know yet until we are able to conduct this research. But this would potentially minimize the possibility of personal bias. And it would provide the guidelines for faculty and administration, and even employers to follow. So bottom line is there's going to be more service dogs handlers in our communities and in our universities and on our campuses and in the workplace. They are protected under the ADA, and universities and employers need to be proactive in developing the safety guidelines for service dog handlers in STEM. There are proven solutions currently available to provide reasonable accommodations. I've done it for 8 years. I know a lot of people who have. I know people who've been in cadaver labs with service animals. There are proven solutions available if we can actively communicate. And then more research would need to be done in select areas like rodent and live animal laboratories. By protecting a service dog with safety guidelines in laboratories, this minimizes accident liability for employers and universities. By proactively developing these guidelines, it also reduces the potential for discrimination or legal action taken against an employer or a university. It improves university recruitment of talented student service dog handlers, much like the student who dropped out with a 3.96 GPA. And then this also improves our workforce recruitment, which is what the National Science Federation has been stating all along. So in closing, there's still a lot of work to be done. But the work requires a willingness from science professionals to cooperate intellectually and problem solve through communication, rather than just simply placing obstacles out of convenience, out of a subjective interpretation of vague policies and laws, or an unwillingness to change. So the presence of service animals is going to continue to increase. And as the Director of Veterinary Services from Augusta University wrote to us in Rhodes Lab, when they wrote to get the empirical data that we were unable to collect, they wrote, and I quote, "In today's culture, I think it is no longer an option that it can't work. But instead, how will it work? The basic question regarding the stress level of rodents when a dog enters the room will have to be answered." So I stand here not as a former angry student or a disgruntled service dog handler or anything, but as a professional who works in the field proactively advocating for positive change. I can see the potentials that the universities have and employers have. And I can also see the frustration of the student service dog handlers. I know where to go from experience. I see the future, and I've been in contact with international biosecurity and compliance officers who also see the future and have told me there will be service dogs in science laboratories. And in 20 years, we're going to look back and ask, why was there even a problem? The time is now to be proactive in addressing these problems and looking at and implementing solutions. One of my biggest fears, honestly, is that Office of Civil Rights is going to find in my favor, and there will be no guidelines in place. And what will happen then is faculty and administrators will be forced to allow service dog handlers in without understanding the safety involved, what can be done to protect students and service dogs. Also, service dog handlers will be allowed access to these laboratories. So they're entering, say, a general chemistry laboratory without any science experience, and they're not knowing how to protect their own service animal. I've seen tons of pictures on the internet of service dogs in laboratories without boots, laying on floors, and I cringe. So that is one of my biggest fears, is that they will find in my favor and there are no guidelines in place. We need to be proactive in developing these. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to contact me. I would be glad to talk to you, to universities, to employers, and help to proactively develop guidelines that would provide the access for service dog handlers in both academics and the workforce. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Have you ever worked with zoos?
Have I worked with zoos? As far as working?
It's just a big question right there. As far as, because I know in the zoo, which is an educational environment also.
Yes.
They have interspecies, animals interacting.
Yes.
And it's just an open question as far as, do you think that would be maybe another source of information?
Yes. There are areas of the zoo that are open to service animals, and there are areas of the zoo that are closed. Generally, the areas that are closed to service animals are the areas that there could be some interspecies disease transmission, or a lot of the bird areas are closed because the bird droppings are all over and this gets on the dog's paws, etc. And a dog is not protected, the service dog is not protected in a zoo environment. Now, as far as working in a zoo, I have not explored that. Yes?
You said you were scared if they find in your favor that there won't be any guidelines.
Yes.
Are you expecting that if they find against you, that guidelines will come eventually? Or
No.
can you explain that more?
Sure, I can, yes. No, I think if they find against me, it's going to be even more difficult to develop guidelines. because the universities and the administrations, it will have set a precedence against allowing service dogs into laboratories. If they do find in my favor and the guidelines aren't in place, I'm afraid then that we will be putting service dogs and handlers and other students at risk. I mean, I know what to do, and I've worked with people. I answer questions all the time. I've had people, like for instance, a parent contacted me whose student was going into a high school chemistry lab. The faculty member said, sure, come on in, without requesting any kind of personal protective equipment. So the parent is the one that informed the faculty member that the dog should be wearing some sort of protection. Did that answer your question? Okay.
You're seeing it as then everyone will have to follow to let the service dogs in, but now we won't have the framework to guide that, and it kind of doesn't help the problem really.
Right, because there could be, potentially there could be, you know, some safety issues at that point that I'm worried about.
And you're simultaneously working on the guidelines while you're fighting this OCR case.
Yes, I have a great attorney that is actually fighting the OCR case for me. As a student researcher is where I really had to devote a lot of time to this OCR case, because every single semester I was fighting for access. Now as a working researcher, I'm, you know, established in my laboratory and I'm established in, you know, the areas that I work in, but now I'm advocating for other students who are facing this type of thing. Yes?
I'm curious about the training that went into having Samson wearing the PPE.
Yes.
Like how long was that? Was he irritated by, you know, wearing the goggles? Because he seems perfectly fine in the pictures. But
you know, service dogs who are trained correctly are usually pretty well established in accepting new types of vests or harnesses or anything like that. So they wear all kinds of different things in their training. But even so, the first time I put goggles on Sam, his first reaction was to try and bat them off. But you know, what we did was we made it fun. Put the goggles on and played fetch, or you know, played with frisbees or something. Put the boots on and did the same thing. It didn't take long for him to acclimate to that. I've seen some other dogs who took a little bit longer, but I worked for 9 months. Samson was 18 months old when I was first paired with him, and it took us 9 months before I said, okay, this dog is going to be able to work in my type of environment. We had to train him to stay in a specific place for 4 hours. That's a long time for even a human to sit still for 4 hours, to wear all of the different equipment and to not pick things up. And I don't know if you've ever been in a safety shower.
Yeah.
Yuck. So teaching him to get into a safety shower and accept that, it took 9 months.
Question.
Yes?
Do you foresee that perhaps if this started to be something that was more accepted, more common, you would have specialized like training programs for service animals, for handlers' careers, oriented them for different environments?
You mean as far as the service dog training itself? Well, I think that anyone who's actively doing their own training or working with an organization doing the training for service dogs, I don't know that anyone yet has developed that type of training because it is fairly specialized. But to have, like, they can you know, contact me and I can come in and show them what needs to be done. Maybe by developing these guidelines, this is something that we can share with service dog training organizations when this comes up, when they have a recipient who's going into a science field, or they're in college and they need to take a class and they need to train their dog. You know, we can help them develop these skills for the dog. So I don't know if it's going to be like a set standard type training, but it's something that can be addressed when the time comes. Yes?
I'm assuming there are vendors for buying the protective equipment that the dog is wearing. Are there some vendors that, how do I want to word it, would be better suited than others, knowing that there's this whole conglomerate of anybody can buy a vest now
Yes.
kind of thing. I mean, we know that those vests do not all look alike, or dogs do not react to those vests the same because
Right.
the texture or the weight of them or those different things. What about the equipment for in a lab?
Well, that's something, I've got a paper right now that we're getting ready to submit for publication that outlines some of the guidelines for the personal protective equipment. Samson wears rec specs, which are impact resistant beyond specs that are required for students in laboratories. He wears boots. The boots have like a rubber on the back, and I use Mutlux. These are organizations that are vendors that I've contacted personally, and they've been very generous in allowing us to experiment with their products. So I do endorse these specific ones. I've also been in contact with some of the laboratory people who are selling lab coats and things like that to universities, and there is some interest there in purchasing in the equipment for a service dog. They're also kind of waiting to see how this OCR case comes out. If they find in my favor, they're more likely to buy the equipment and make it available. And that is another thing, though. A lot of questions come up is, so how does a student get this equipment? Because it's not cheap. The goggles, are $60. The boots are $30 to $45. The additional cost of the lab coat. That all comes with being a service dog handler. You would take on that cost. Did that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Does, thank you.
Sure.
So I know you see service dogs in the medical field.
Mm-hmm.
There are people are wanting service dogs in surgery facilities now and so forth. But it's a growing field for sure.
Yeah, it is. And there are some limitations. Like if it's a sterile environment, a service dog would not be allowed in there. I have been in the hospital, I've been in ICU, and had my service dog with me around the clock. But in that type of situation, I had to have someone come in, like hospital staff couldn't take out my dog or something along that lines. But there are some guidelines. I've also talked to hospital compliance people, and we're trying to work on developing some more guidelines to minimize the free-for-all, so to speak.
Right.
Yes.
That's what I was getting to.
Yes. I'm with you. Yes.
Is there a specific company that trains these type of service dogs that would be definitely legitimate versus the fraudulent ones?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I know, I'm aware of some specific training organizations that I would endorse. There are probably 2 handfuls in the nation that I would, currently endorse. The organization that Samson came from is out of Peoria, Illinois, and they're called Paws Giving Independence. And they do mostly mobility or medical alert, like seizure, diabetic alert type things. And they are very, very aware of how to train a service dog for a science lab just by working with me. And but they are fairly localized. So as far as service dog training for science laboratories, right now I know of one. But there are legitimate service dog training organizations that I think would be willing to learn how to train the service dogs for science environments.
How do we know if they're legitimate? Just in general, I'm thinking even in a non-science environment, if
Okay.
somebody needed a service dog in general,
Mhm.
how do we know if they're legitimate organizations?
Most legitimate organizations don't charge for their service dog. Like the Paws Giving Independence, Canines for Warriors, there's several other, CCI, ECAD, they don't charge. They place their service dog free of charge to the recipient. They rely a lot of times on volunteers and donations primarily. A lot of these organizations that are legitimate will be very transparent in their end of the year, fiscal year tax returns and profit margins and all that kind of thing. Are nonprofit. Most of them are nonprofits. They also, there can be red flags. If someone wants to ship you a dog without any kind of, one-on-one, that would be a red flag. If they wanted to have you come in for 3 days and then handed you a dog, that would be a red flag. Someone who isn't saying you need to work with this dog in our presence, here, just here's the dog, take it home, that would be a red flag. Anyone else?
Maybe a silly question.
No, go ahead. No question is silly.
Does Sam ever, does it get hot in the lab coat? I mean, dogs get hot, I get hot in the lab coat, so I'm just curious, did it take long to get used to that?
No, the lab coat is fairly lightweight. So, and he wears this vest, but he also wears he can wear a complete leather harness that has sheepskin on the inside when it's very icy conditions. I have a brain injury which affects my mobility on my left side. Sometimes my foot doesn't take a step when my brain said it did. And so he uses, especially in icy conditions, he has a full leather harness that he can wear. So he's used to that type of thing. So wearing a lightweight coat, it really isn't too bad for him. You can always, in a research laboratory, provide a fan that you could clip on or something if that was a concern. But it has never been a problem for us, even wearing the boots and things. What else? Yes.
As you're developing these guidelines,
Mhm.
is there a website for reference for good practices or best practices based on your experience, or anything else as a reference as people are going into this frontier with the service dog?
Are you saying are there references that I'm using, or?
For sources for people who might be willing or interested in pursuing a scientific laboratory career?
Yeah, right now there really isn't much out there that's made available. Everything that I've developed through experience. But I have worked very closely with service dog training organizations. I've worked very closely with science faculty in administration and disability offices. That is honestly, I'm a researcher. I'm a lab rat. I like to stay in my lab and do things. Being a service dog advocate was never the plan for me. But that's the reason I developed this company. And honestly, most of what I do is free of charge, just so that I can help people. But I developed this company so that I could develop these guidelines and I can get this information out. But I'm being helped by a lot of people. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much for your time and your interest. I really appreciate it. I hope you found something useful out of this. Thank you.